Okay, so here's an interesting set of issues that's been the subject of conversation between me and a viewer by the name of Felix. We've had some very interesting conversations about a variety of some of the detailed issues involved here. And here's one of them. So, when I was first starting to think about this, the thing that was really clear to me at first was that this middle line here made a lot of sense when you thought about it in terms of the model. So that it would be associated with with sense or present because of the nature of water. Because sense flow is like the flow of water. But what was not as clear to me was whether the top or bottom line was future or past. That was something that I kind of went back and forth about quite a bit. And there's a number of different reasons why. And so Felix brought up this issue that has to do with the sequence of the lines. So it's typically thought of that the bottom line is the first line, second, third. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, and maybe someone can correct me on this, but my instinct about this, I haven't been able to find a direct reference, is that this is primarily due to the casting of the I Ching. So this would normally be 6 lines in the case of a hexagram. And when you were casting I Ching, traditionally you would be using the yarrow stalk oracle. Now they use the coins, and each time you do the operation, whether it's with the yarrow stalks or the coins, you end up with a value that is one line, and then you go to the next, which is above that. And so Felix is saying, well, doesn't that suggest that the most recent one is on top, and therefore that would be the future? And it's a good point. It's an interesting issue. But here's my thinking on it. Well, first of all, it's supposedly the case that the use of the I Ching as an oracle was something that happened after its invention. And some people consider it to be a perversion of the text, of the symbolic system, of the meaning. Now, I'm not sure what to think about that. I have used it as an oracle, and I think it's quite amazing. And at the same time, I'm very wary of it. There's something about it that's, I think, prone to be misleading and confusing. And of course, the range of possible interpretations is essentially infinite. Nevertheless, it provides some very interesting results. And sometimes you can gain insight into a situation through this, let's say, ritual, if you like. But whether that was part of the original intent of the system, I think that's really quite open to at least debate, but it seems quite likely that no, it wasn't. And so, was there any kind of sense of sequence of the lines prior to using the I Ching as an oracle, to casting the lines? I'm not so sure. If anyone has any information on that, I would be very curious to see it. But regardless of all that, let's think about what sequence means. Because, okay, you can make the case that, let's see, that thunder is like the past. Okay, so I'll switch this around here. We'll do it the other way. Because it's the memory of some big event in the past that kind of spurs one towards the future, if you like, right? But then the question is, well, how is mountain stillness like the future? That just doesn't quite make sense to me. And actually, mountain was the thing that really got me to think about how, stillness is very much like the past. What's happened has happened. What's done is done. And so, my sense was, well, this really makes more sense. That memory and past would be things that are fixed, that are still. Of course, yes, memory can change, but that's not memory, right? Memory is the thing that's held, that's still. And it may change, but then it's not really memory anymore. And a new memory may form, and that will be held still, right? Like a mountain is similar, right? It's a fixture. But sometimes there's a volcano, right? So, yes, it's stillness for the time being. But it is definitely a property of the past, right? Is it a property of the future? I mean, I could imagine that one might say that holding to the image is sort of like a stillness thing. So, perhaps. But here's the bottom line. Like, if we're going to think about sequence on the most elemental level, my question would be, how does memory come first? Right? So how does the past come first? You can't remember something until there's an event to remember. Something has to happen before there is a past. So you can think of this as being like the direction of an arrow, where the first thing happening is the tip of the arrow. And these are the things which follow. So in a certain sense, the imagination is the first thing that happens, because you can't even have sense without imagination. What was the thing that imagined the potential of sense? Now, if you think about this as, let's say, the ordinary everyday life biological way of thinking of it, then it kind of looks like this, right? Because we have sense impressions which are stored, and then we can do stuff with them, right? You can't really do a heck of a lot with just the sense impressions because they keep changing. In order to have the imaginative capability of cognition operate, there needs to be objects, and so there have to be certain types of things which are stored. Like, we can't do any of this communicating we're doing right now if we don't have the words. So there are these things stored in our consciousness that allow us to, well, create imaginative structures. And so in a very real way, you can think of sense as being the root of that. But if you're thinking about the origins, if you're thinking about the beginning, like prior to the construction of the sensory apparatus, that was a real period of time. So something happened before that. So even though it seems like this sequence here, which isn't even the inversion that we were talking about before, this is a completely different way of looking at it that makes sense from the point of view of our experience. But if we're thinking about how it began, which I think is in some sense one of the primary concerns of ontology. If you're concerned with the nature of being, you're trying to understand what the ground of being is, and that is essentially where things started. How could we have anything without imagination being the first in the series? And, that actually fits with some of the classical ideas from the Greeks down through the kind of philosophical movement post-Christianity, you could say, like Steiner and stuff, the people who were thinking about the descendant divine powers. And the way they discuss it is that there were these kind of a hierarchy of falling angels, if you like. And one of the first ones in the series were called something like the imaginary, the ones who imagined. And it was ones who came after them, who fell a little further into the imagination of the prior order, that began to reside within the imagination. So this is all very speculative. It's all very out there, and can't prove it, but on a very poetic and elemental level, it makes a lot of sense. Because if consciousness is the root of being, and God is the root consciousness, then all of this is happening within the mind of God. And there is, in essence, a process within the thinking of God that has produced this creation. And I would say in dialectic with the other, which was originally the void, and which became Shekinah, the creation, inside the mind of God. And so a part of God's mind became these imaginary properties, which you could think of as being Shiva, the creator-destroyer, right? And then the ones that are holding to it are Vishnu, the ones who are trying to keep things into a particular form. So that would be memory, right? And the one sensing it would be Brahma at the root. I mean, okay, maybe that confuses the whole thing. But I would say in a physical sense, when we talk about sense, it would be a sense apparatus, an actual structure of molecules that allow for consciousness to experience something. And there would have to be an imagination to construct that sensory apparatus before it could operate. So that's my sense of it. I think that pretty much covers most of what I wanted to say. I hope you found that interesting. If you'd like to support the efforts, there are links in the description. They're down here too. And I thank you for your attention and your time, and look forward to hearing more from those of you who find this stuff interesting. Adios.